What if the story of America's immigration wasn't just about open doors, but about the women who were deliberately locked out? In 1910, thousands of Chinese women crossed the Pacific, fleeing famine and war, only to face something far worse than the journey: stripped, interrogated, and detained for months on a remote island, simply for being who they were. They weren't criminals, they weren't threats. Yet the U.S. government built an entire system to stop them from building lives here. But they fought back in ways that changed laws, won votes, and reached the Supreme Court. Their defiance wasn't loud. It was etched in poems on prison walls, cast in secret ballots, and argued in courtrooms. These are the stories textbooks erased, and the ones that reshaped the nation. Stay with me, and you'll never look at American history the same way again. If this hidden, bizarre history already has you hooked, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now. We drop more wild true stories every 48 hours. All right, grab a cup of coffee, or tea if that's your thing. Get comfortable and let's dive straight in. This one's worth staying sharp for. Gold Rush Waves and Rising Racism, 1848 to 1870s. The California Gold Rush began in 1848 and pulled Chinese women to the West Coast. They worked on farms in San Francisco textile factories and as laborers on the Central Pacific Railroad, building infrastructure that supported westward expansion and Civil War troop movements. By the early 1850s, approximately 25,000 Chinese immigrants had arrived, alongside Irish famine refugees and German settlers. European women were generally accepted. Chinese women were not. They were labeled a multiple threat: racial danger to white purity, economic competition to white workers, carriers of disease, moral and religious outsiders, and sexual risks, stereotyped as promiscuous prostitutes spreading disease even when they were laborers or wives. Newspapers and cartoons fueled the hostility. The rhetoric was deliberate and intense, turning economic migration into perceived existential danger. The Page Act lockout and Angel Island horror, 1875 to 1940. The Page Act of 1875 was the first major federal law restricting immigration. It officially prohibited forced coolie laborers and prostitutes from China, Japan, and other Oriental countries. In practice, it blocked Chinese women almost entirely. Consular officials interrogated them aggressively. At Angel Island, women endured invasive medical exams and humiliating questions about their personal lives. Detainees carved poems into the barracks walls, describing the process as barbarous, humiliating, and discriminatory. Many chose not to immigrate rather than face it. The result was immediate. The ratio of Chinese women to men fell from about 78 per 1,000 in the early 1870s to 48 after the law passed. Combined with West Coast bans on interracial marriage, the act prevented family formation and limited Asian American community growth for generations. Quiet Rebellion. Suffrage and votes, a 1910s. Tye Leung Schulze was born in San Francisco, Chinatown in 1887. At age 12, she escaped an arranged marriage and found safety with activist Donaldina Cameron, who rescued trafficked girls. She learned English and, in 1910, became the first Chinese-American woman hired by the federal government, an interpreter at Angel Island. After California granted women the vote in 1911, Tye voted in the 1912 presidential primary on May 19th, the first Chinese-American woman to do so in the United States. Newspapers called it a historic moment. She later married white immigration inspector Charles Schulze, defying anti-miscegenation laws. Her actions were quiet but powerful: one ballot, one marriage, and one voice in a system designed to silence her. She proved that small, deliberate steps could challenge entire structures of exclusion. World War II camps and Supreme Court breakthroughs, 1940s. After Pearl Harbor, Executive Order 9066 forced more than 120,000 Japanese Americans, including thousands of women and girls, into internment camps surrounded by barbed wire. They ran makeshift schools, grew food in small gardens, and kept families intact under harsh conditions. Mitsuye Endo, a typist from Sacramento who had never visited Japan, lost her state job because of her ancestry. Lawyers selected her as the ideal test case. She refused special release, demanding justice for everyone. In December 1944, the Supreme Court ruled in ex parte Endo that the government could not detain loyal American citizens. Camps began to close. Yuri Kochiyama interned at Jerome Camp in Arkansas, later moved to Harlem, raised 6 children, hosted Malcolm X, and stood beside him during his assassination in 1965. She bridged Asian American and Black civil rights movements for decades. The exotic spectacle. Afong Moy's arrival, 1834. In 1834, Afong Moy became the first recorded Chinese woman to arrive in the United States. Merchants brought her from Guangzhou to New York to promote Chinese goods. Instead, they exhibited her as the Chinese lady. Paying audiences watched her walk on 4-inch bound feet, eat with chopsticks, and perform traditional gestures. She toured major cities and met presidents, but the show was pure exploitation. Later, P.T. Barnum repackaged her in freak exhibitions until her feet were no longer considered small enough. By 1850, she disappeared from records. This early spectacle treated her not as an immigrant, but as a curiosity, setting the tone for decades of viewing Asian women as exotic threats rather than people. Legacy and why it matters today. The journey began with paid exhibitions of bound feet and ended with Supreme Court victories. Along the way, women carved defiant poems into detention walls, cast historic votes, and fought for justice inside internment camps. Patsy Mink became the first woman of color elected to Congress in 1965 and co-authored Title IX, opening education and sports to millions of girls. Grace Lee Boggs built community power in Detroit, showing that real change often starts locally. Stereotypes persist, model minority myths, exoticization, perpetual foreigner. But the legacy is stronger. These women turned bizarre exclusion, invasive interrogations, and forced confinement into lasting change. Their stories are not fiction. They are documented history that reshaped laws, rights, and American identity. They remind us that the past is often stranger, more painful, and far braver than most people realize. These women crossed oceans only to be paraded, interrogated, and locked away, yet they turned every barrier into a breakthrough. From paid exhibitions of bound feet to Supreme Court rulings that freed thousands, from secret poems scratched in detention walls to ballots that defied entire systems. Their stories aren't just history, they're proof that the strangest chapters often hold the most courage. If you've made it this far, you now know what most people never learn. The real America was built not just by open doors, but by women who refused to stay shut out. Thanks for watching. If this hit you the way it hit me, drop a comment. Which part shocked you the most? Hit like if you want more forgotten, wild true stories. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. We'll keep digging. See you soon.